There's this specific kind of Sunday night feeling that I think a lot of people know, but nobody really talks about. You've just checked your bank account, maybe out of habit, maybe out of dread, and the number sitting there is technically fine. Like you're not in crisis, the rent is covered, there's food in the fridge, but there's this low, persistent hum of anxiety that doesn't go away. Because you know that between right now and the next paycheck, there is basically zero room for anything to go wrong. A car repair, a dentist visit, a friend's wedding you forgot about. Any of those things, and you're reshuffling money in a way that makes you feel like you're playing some exhausting, never-ending game of financial Tetris. And the frustrating part? You're not broke. You're working. You're trying. But somehow, trying harder doesn't seem to change the ceiling. Every month kind of looks like the last one, and the idea of making more money, significantly more money, feels like something that happens to other people. People with better connections, or a specific kind of luck, or some secret you haven't figured out yet. That's where I was for a long time. My name is Emmy, and I spend way too much time thinking about money. Not just the mechanics of it, but the psychology, the identity stuff, the weird way that our relationship with earning and spending shapes almost every corner of our lives in ways we don't consciously realize. And one of the things I've become genuinely obsessed with over the years is this specific threshold, the first $5,000 month, and why crossing it seems to change not just someone's finances, but almost everything about how they see themselves and what they believe is possible. Because here's what I've noticed, and what I want to walk through with you today. The $5,000 month isn't really about the money, or at least it's not only about the money. It's about a series of internal shifts that happen when you prove something to yourself that you couldn't prove before. And once those shifts happen, things that felt impossible start to feel like just a matter of timing. The way you make decisions changes, the way you spend changes, the way you talk about money changes, even the way you sleep changes, honestly. So if you're sitting somewhere below that number right now and wondering why progress feels so slow, or if you've already crossed it and you're trying to make sense of why everything feels different, I think this is going to be one of those conversations that stays with you. Let's start at the very beginning, because I think a lot of people underestimate how much of their financial life is running on an invisible operating system that was installed in childhood and never updated. Most of us grew up in households where money was either a source of stress, a topic that wasn't discussed, or something that was approached with a very specific and often limiting set of beliefs. Things like, money is hard to come by, people like us don't get rich, making too much money makes you greedy, you should be grateful for what you have. None of these are evil ideas. A lot of them come from love, from protection, from very real experiences that shaped the people who raised us. But they settle into your subconscious like sediment, and over time they form this invisible ceiling, a kind of internal speed limit on what you believe you're allowed to earn. Psychologists actually have a term for this. It's called your financial thermostat. The idea is that most people have an internalized normal around money, a range that feels comfortable, familiar, safe. When you fall below it, you feel anxious and you hustle. When you start to rise above it, something interesting happens. You self-sabotage, not intentionally, not consciously, but you start making decisions, spending a little more, working a little less, turning down opportunities that bring you back down to what feels normal, back to the temperature your internal thermostat is set to. And for a huge number of people, that thermostat is set below $5,000. Which means that crossing it isn't just a financial event, it's a thermostat resetting event, and those are surprisingly rare and surprisingly powerful. I remember the first time I heard someone I knew, not a celebrity, not some guru on the internet, just a regular person I actually knew, casually mention that they'd had a $5,000 month, and my immediate reaction wasn't celebration. It was this weird cocktail of skepticism and something that, if I'm honest, was probably closer to envy than I'd like to admit. Because it felt like they'd crossed into a category that wasn't meant for me, like they had somehow found a door I didn't even know existed. That reaction, that specific feeling, is incredibly important data because it tells you exactly where your thermostat is set. So let's talk about what actually changes when you hit that first $5,000 month, and I want to go deeper than the surface stuff because I think the surface stuff is kind of obvious. Yes, you have more money. Yes, you can pay off debt faster. Yes, you can start saving properly. Those things are real and they matter, but they're almost secondary to what happens underneath. The first thing that changes, and this is the big one, is your relationship with possibility. There's a concept I think about a lot called proof of concept. In business, it means you've demonstrated that an idea actually works in the real world, not just in theory. And what a first $5,000 month gives you is personal proof of concept. It's evidence, gathered from your own life, that you are capable of generating that kind of income. And evidence is extraordinarily powerful in a way that motivation and inspiration simply aren't. Here's the difference. Motivation is borrowed. It comes from outside you, from a video you watched, a book you read, a conversation that fired you up. And it fades, sometimes within hours, because it was never really yours to begin with. But evidence is permanent. Once you've done something, nobody can undo it. It happened. It's in the record. And your brain, which is fundamentally an evidence processing machine, treats it completely differently from a wish or a hope. Before the $5,000 month, when someone asks you, do you think you could make this work, there's always this small but significant asterisk in your answer. Like, you hope so, you're working towards it, you think maybe, but you don't actually know. After the $5,000 month, that asterisk disappears. You know, and knowing changes your posture in a way that other people can feel and that opportunities respond to in ways that are hard to explain but very real. A friend of mine spent almost 2 years building a freelance design business while working a day job. She was making maybe $2,000 a month on the side, enough to feel encouraging but not enough to feel like proof of anything. And then, one month, a few projects lined up in a way that had never happened before, and she made just over $5,000. She told me afterward that even though the next month went back to normal, something had fundamentally shifted. She stopped presenting herself as someone who was trying to build a freelance business and started presenting herself as a freelance designer. The language changed. The energy changed. She started charging more not because her skills changed, but because her self-image changed. Within 6 months, $5,000 months were consistent. Within a year, she'd left the day job. The $5,000 month wasn't the destination. It was the moment she believed she could reach the destination.
The second thing that changes is how you relate to risk. And this one is counterintuitive because you'd think that having more money would make you more conservative, more protective of what you've built. But for most people, the opposite happens, and it makes complete sense when you think about it. When you're operating below a certain income threshold, every financial decision carries enormous weight. Saying yes to an online course, a better camera, a professional tool for your business, these feel like gambles because the cost relative to your income is significant. You do this mental math that goes something like, if I spend $300 on this and it doesn't work, that's basically a week of groceries. So you hold back, you underinvest, you wait until you're sure before you move. But here's the cruel irony. Underinvesting is usually one of the main reasons you stay at the level you're at. The better camera gets you the better clients. The course teaches you the skill that doubles your rate. The tool saves you 10 hours a month that you redirect into growth. Scarcity doesn't just drain your bank account, it drains your willingness to make the bets that would end the scarcity. It's one of the sneakier traps in personal finance, and almost nobody talks about it directly. When you hit $5,000 and start to stabilize there, the math changes. The same $300 investment now feels different. It's no longer a week of groceries. It's a calculated business expense that you can absorb even if it doesn't work perfectly. And so you start saying yes to things you used to say no to. You start experimenting. And experimentation is basically the engine of all income growth. You can't optimize what you never test. I want to be careful here, though, because I've seen people overcorrect. Hitting your first $5,000 month and immediately lifestyle inflating, buying courses left and right, spending on investing in yourself as a way to avoid the harder work, that's its own trap. The shift in risk tolerance only becomes productive when it's paired with clarity about what you're actually betting on and why. Otherwise, you're just comfortable with losing money, which is not the same thing as being strategic about growth. The third shift is about time, and specifically about how you start to value it. Below a certain income level, there's this pressure to be constantly available, constantly hustling, constantly saying yes, because scarcity, real or perceived, makes every opportunity feel like it might be the last one. Turning down work feels reckless. Raising your rates feels dangerous. Taking a day off feels like falling behind. And so you end up in this exhausting pattern where you're working more hours but somehow not making meaningful progress, because busyness and productivity are very different things, and it's remarkably easy to confuse one for the other when you're stressed. What a stable $5,000 month does is give you, for the first time, a little bit of breathing room. And breathing room is not a luxury, it's actually a productivity superpower. When you're not operating from scarcity, you can start asking different questions. Instead of how do I get more clients, you can ask which clients are actually worth keeping. Instead of how do I make more money this month, you can ask what would make me $5,000 a month more easily. Those are completely different questions, and they lead to completely different places. This is something Tim Ferriss talks about, the idea that being busy is a form of laziness, lazy thinking specifically. It's easier to just do more than it is to sit down and figure out what you should actually be doing. But sitting down and figuring it out requires a certain level of calm that's very hard to access when you're in survival mode. There's a reason why the advice, work smarter, not harder, drives people crazy when they're struggling financially. It sounds dismissive, like someone telling you to just relax when the house is on fire. But there's a real kernel of truth buried in there. It's just that you often can't access that truth until you've created a little bit of stability. The $5,000 month is often the first time people create enough stability to step back and actually work smarter, because for the first time, they're not running from a fire. Let me talk about identity for a minute, because I think it's actually the most important piece of this whole puzzle, and it gets the least airtime in conversations about personal finance. Your financial reality is largely a reflection of your financial identity, meaning the story you tell yourself about who you are in relation to money. And these stories are stubborn. They're reinforced by every experience that confirms them and rationalized away every time something challenges them. If your story is, I'm bad with money, you'll unconsciously make decisions that confirm that story, not because you're self-destructive, but because humans are meaning-making creatures who need their experience to be consistent with their self-concept. The brain actually finds inconsistency uncomfortable. It's called cognitive dissonance, and it will work overtime to reduce that discomfort, even if reducing it means undermining your own progress. Here's where it gets interesting. Crossing $5,000 for the first time is an identity disruption. It creates a fact that doesn't fit your old story, and you have two choices at that point. You can dismiss the fact, like that was a fluke, it won't happen again, I got lucky, or you can update the story. And the people who consistently grow past $5,000, past $10,000, past $20,000, they're the people who choose, consciously or instinctively, to update the story. They start saying, I'm someone who makes $5,000 a month before it's consistently true, because they understand that identity precedes behavior. You don't wait until you feel confident to act confident. You act confident until you feel it. You don't wait until you feel like an entrepreneur to call yourself one. You call yourself one, and then you make decisions accordingly. It feels fake at first. It genuinely does. But so does every new version of yourself until you've inhabited it long enough for it to become real. This is not toxic positivity or law of attraction fluff. It's just applied psychology. The stories we tell ourselves shape the decisions we make, which shape the results we get, which then either confirm or challenge the story. You can enter that cycle at any point. The most leverage comes from entering it at the story level. Now, here's something I don't hear enough people talk about honestly, and it has to do with the social dimension of growing your income. When you start making significantly more money than the people around you, your friends, your family, maybe even your partner, things get weird. And I mean that in the most human, compassionate way possible, because it's not anyone's fault, it's just what happens when one person's life starts to look different from the group's. The people who love you might get quiet when you talk about your wins. Someone who's been your biggest cheerleader might suddenly seem less enthusiastic. Old friends might start making jokes that feel like they have a little edge to them, and you might find yourself downplaying your success, apologizing for your ambition, shrinking yourself down to stay comfortable in rooms that used to fit perfectly. This is real, and it's painful, and it doesn't get talked about enough in the personal finance space because it's easier to talk about spreadsheets than feelings. The first $5,000 month often accelerates this process because it's visible. It usually means something in your external life is changing. You're talking about money differently. You're making different decisions. Maybe you're leaving a job or restructuring your time. And that visibility invites opinions, comparisons, projections.
What I want you to understand is that the discomfort other people feel about your growth is not your responsibility to fix. You can be sensitive about it. You can be thoughtful about when and how you share things. You can hold space for the fact that people who love you can simultaneously love you and struggle with watching you outgrow a version of yourself they were comfortable with. All of that is possible at once. What you cannot do, if you're serious about your financial life, is shrink yourself down to manage someone else's feelings about your growth. That's a trade with a very bad long-term return. Surround yourself, even just incrementally, with people who are operating at the level you want to reach, not because you're abandoning your roots, but because environment shapes behavior in ways we chronically underestimate, and spending time with people for whom a $5,000 month is normal will make it feel more normal to you. Proximity to possibility is a genuine force. Let's talk about systems, because this is where the $5,000 month starts to really stick or slide. A lot of people hit $5,000 once, maybe through a burst of effort, a lucky project, a particularly good month, and then watch it slip back. And they spend months or years chasing it again, always feeling like they're this close without being able to consistently hold it. And usually, the issue isn't motivation or skill, it's the absence of systems. Below a certain income level, you can run things on effort and attention. You remember your clients, you keep track of your invoices in your head, you manage your schedule by gut feel. And that works up to a point, but as things scale, the human brain becomes the bottleneck. There's only so much working memory, only so many hours of focus, only so much willpower to allocate in a given day. Systems are what allow income to stabilize and grow without requiring proportionally more of you. A client onboarding system means you're not reinventing the wheel every time someone new comes in. A simple financial tracking habit means you know exactly where you stand at any moment without the Sunday dread. A weekly review of your work and pipeline means nothing falls through the cracks during the busy weeks when you're least likely to notice. None of this is exciting, I'll be honest. I find the word systems kind of boring, and I've had to really work on appreciating this stuff, because it feels like the unsexy back half of building an income. But the people who consistently stay above $5,000, who grow to $10,000 and beyond, almost always have one thing in common. They stopped relying on themselves to hold everything in their head and built external structures to carry the load, even simple ones, even imperfect ones. Think of it this way. The first $5,000 month is about breaking a ceiling. The systems are about raising the floor. I want to spend a moment on what happens to your relationship with spending, because this is one of the most telling indicators of whether someone's first $5,000 month is going to be a fluke or a foundation. There's a version of this story where someone hits $5,000 for the first time, and the very first thing they do is upgrade their lifestyle. Better apartment, nicer car, more eating out, a few things they've been wanting to buy for a while. And I get it, truly. After months or years of deprivation mode, the first taste of abundance feels like permission to finally let go. And to some extent, you should celebrate. Denying yourself every good thing in pursuit of financial progress is its own kind of misery, and it's not sustainable. But there's a difference between intentional celebration and reflexive lifestyle inflation. And reflexive lifestyle inflation is the single fastest way to make sure your first $5,000 month stays your only $5,000 month, because you've immediately raised your baseline expenses to match your new income, which means you're right back to having no margin, no cushion, no room to breathe. The shift that distinguishes people who stay above $5,000 from people who don't is this. They start treating a meaningful portion of every increase as fuel, not reward. The first $500 you make above your previous income doesn't become a better subscription package. It becomes an emergency fund contribution, a debt payment, a reinvestment into whatever created the $5,000 in the first place. You reward yourself, yes. You celebrate, yes. But you don't immediately spend up to the ceiling of what you're making, because that ceiling is still moving and you need runway. This is honestly one of the hardest psychological adjustments in personal finance, because spending feels good in an immediate, visceral way, and saving and reinvesting feel good in a delayed, abstract way. Your brain is not naturally optimized for delayed gratification. You have to practice it deliberately, imperfectly, repeatedly, until it becomes a reflex. The last thing I want to talk about, and maybe the most important, is what happens to your relationship with the nature of income itself. Most of us grew up with a single, very rigid model of what income looks like. You trade time for money in a fixed arrangement. Your income is determined by someone else, an employer, a salary band, an hourly rate that you maybe negotiate once every year or two. And for a very long time, that model is the only one that feels real. Everything else seems complicated, risky for other types of people. Building a $5,000 month outside of a traditional salary through freelancing, consulting, a side business, content creation, skill-based work, whatever it might be, shatters that model in a way that cannot be unseen, because you discover something profound. Income is not fixed. Income is a result. It's an output of value delivered to other people, and the amount of value you deliver is to a much greater extent than you've probably been told within your control. This sounds simple, but the implications are enormous, because if income is a result, then it can be engineered. You can study it, you can iterate on it, you can find the approaches that create more of it with less friction, and you can improve at those approaches over time. You are not passively receiving income at the mercy of someone else's budget cycle. You are actively generating it. And that shift from passive recipient to active generator is maybe the deepest identity change that comes out of a first $5,000 month. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's linear. It doesn't mean there won't be months where nothing seems to work and you're back to that Sunday night feeling with the low hum of anxiety. But you know something now that you didn't know before. You know it's possible. You know what it felt like. You know the path exists because you've walked it at least once, and you cannot unknow that. So here's what I want you to take away from all of this. The first $5,000 month matters. It matters more than the actual dollars in it, which is a strange thing to say about money, but it's true. It matters because of what it proves, what it reshapes, what it unlocks inside you. It resets your financial thermostat. It shifts how you relate to risk. It changes how you value your time. It disrupts the old identity story and gives you the raw material for a new one. It shows you that income is something you generate, not something that's given to you. but it only delivers all of that if you meet it with intention. If you dismiss it as a fluke, it fades. If you immediately spend it away, it fades. If you don't build the systems to hold it, it fades. The month itself is just a moment. What you do with the shift it creates, that's the real work. If you're still working toward your first $5,000 month right now, I want you to hear this clearly. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is almost certainly smaller than it looks. Not because I'm trying to hype you up or sell you something, but because the main thing standing between most people and that threshold is not skill, not talent, not luck. It's belief, specifically the belief that it's possible for them specifically, not just for other people. And belief is something you can change, not by thinking harder about it, but by taking small actions that gather evidence, that prove small things first, that slowly and then suddenly shift what feels normal to you. Raise your thermostat 1 degree at a time, build the evidence, update the story. Everything changes after the first $5,000 month, but you have to let it. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've already had your first $5,000 month or your first $10,000 month, drop it in the comments, not to brag, but because someone watching this right now needs to see that it's real and it happened to a real person and it can happen to them too.